Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing fine.
Good.
Ready and raring to go,
That's
as
right.
usual.
That's right.
So, after we had our lightning storm last night,
Yeah,
I bet you heard it.
Yeah, my son slept through it. I can't believe it.
No tragedy. We didn't have to call FEMA. There's no floods yet, and so we're doing well. We adapted to it. But I want to talk about the subject. It's been around, now way too long. I thought maybe it would end sooner, and that's this whole thing about coronavirus and the extremists that want to continue it forever and what effect it has had. If you just had nothing other than the coronavirus and you didn't have, the Federal Reserve messing up the economy and causing a stock market crash, and there was no major problems around the world, there wouldn't be a whole lot to talk about because all the scare tactics have seemed to be falling flat. How many people really die, and they fudge the figures and they stack the deck and say more people have died and they haven't even tested the people, and yet they're listed as deaths. We've been over that. But today I want to approach this a slightly different manner and back to our subject that we talk so much about, and that is foreign policy. And the problems with coronavirus, right or wrong, there's a problem out there. The lockdown, there's a real big problem there because it must have done a lot more harm than good, or is doing a lot more harm than good. And a lot of people are coming forth. It's great to hear from those two doctors from California telling the truth about what's happening. But of course, they got banned. You tell the truth, you could get banned. So the big question is the chaos that exists, the financial chaos, which is all due to the Fed, and then all this contrived lockdown and really crashing the economy. What's it going to do to the neocons? They run things,
That's right.
Will it kill or enhance the neocon foreign policy? Because in one way, you could argue, where are they going to get the money? It doesn't seem right now the printing press are working and people are taking our money. But that can't go on forever. But at present time, they don't have to worry about it. The funding is there. It keeps pouring out and it's created out of thin air. But so I think the policy, they're going to demand it. But then there's going to be hesitation too, because the scaremongering actually has infiltrated everybody, including the military, and they're starting to use it as an excuse. Why are we out there? Don't we have to back off? And this is dangerous. And whether it really is dangerous or not, it's great. That this might be a benefit, backing off and not looking for another war. So it may actually help those of us who would like to see a lot less of it. But the old thing is we've heard this almost with every war, the people who agitate for war, we always look for the false flags and excuses, and just think of what we went through with getting the Middle East wars going and remaking the Middle East and how tragic that was. So they use it as an excuse. So right now, it's a distraction. A lot of people believe World War II had something to do with a distraction. The Depression was roaring and had been going on for a decade, and they say, oh, wars help in a downturn. All it does is make you employed, getting shot at. It has nothing to do with economic growth. So there are some questions up here, and I guess there may be a little bit of truth in both sides. But one thing is, I don't think the neocons are going to go away. I think they're all there, and I think they were well prepared for 9/11, and they talked about a potential, Pearl Harbor attack, and they took good they took good advantage of this. At the same time, they may win on their policy, but I think the greatest victims in all of this, whether it's the spending or the warmongering or the sanctions that we put on the fighting, are the American people and our liberties. I think that is the biggest challenge, because the way I see it, if we would preserve the liberties of the American people, or any people, problems can be solved and many problems eliminated, such as the war. So since almost all this activity we've seen for years and years has been a steady decline on the individual liberty of all Americans, and of course the whole world suffers from that. But that part of the problem isn't over yet. But exactly what's going to happen to the foreign policy when the neocons, have their next move is up for grabs. So we'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about that issue.
Yeah, and we have some of the specifics that we'll go into. With regard to our question, are they going to get emboldened, or are they going to, get killed by it? Their policy, at least. But we did want to start out by talking a little bit about an article that we both noticed today from the Wall Street Journal, and we can actually click over and have a look at the headline. Do lockdowns save many lives? In most places, the data say no. So this is Wall Street Journal. This isn't some fringy thing. And it's written by a gentleman named T.J. Rogers. He's the CEO of a semiconductor company with a background in science. And what he did is that he crunched a lot of numbers. And he took a look at, his methodology was he counted deaths per million for a 21-day period after these different places that he measured hit 1 per million. So there's a 21-day period. As soon as they hit 1 per million, he followed it for 21 days to find out how many deaths per million overall there were. And what he found was pretty interesting, actually, because first of all, he found, and we've talked about this on the show before, this one-size-fits-all approach to everything has been counterproductive, disastrous. He concedes that maybe in New York, with the tight communities and public transport, some sort of lockdown may have been appropriate. But then he said, in my native Wisconsin, it totally wasn't appropriate. But here's a couple of things that he found that was interesting. We've been following the Sweden situation pretty closely because they did not lock down. They made suggestions. They didn't close their schools. They didn't close their restaurants. They didn't mandate you stay at home. But Sweden has clocked in, according to the way he measured it, at about 80 per million, 80 deaths per million for coronavirus. Sounds pretty bad, but actually that's lower than Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Louisiana, Michigan, New York, and New Jersey, and those are all lockdown states. It's lower than Italy, Spain, and the UK, and it's about like France, and France was a strict lockdown state. So they are, and here was his conclusion, actually. We should cheer for Sweden to succeed, not ghoulishly bash them. They may prove that many aspects of the shutdown were mistakes, ineffective, but economically devastating. And so this is a good, they said, follow the science. This is pretty good science looking at whether it's effective or not, and it really has not proven effective.
And that's the real issue. They do this because they're going to save our lives by doing this. But the one subject they don't touch, and I don't think they do in this study, but there have been a few starting to look at it, and that is there are deaths coming as a result of the shutdown. The medical profession is in shambles, with the hospitals. And people are dying because they won't go, and they're intimidated, and who wouldn't be intimidated about, the fright, walk in and you're going to get this deadly disease and you're all going to die.
Yeah.
So they stay at home with their heart attacks, they cancel all these surgeries, hospitals are going bankrupt, and the beds are empty and people are every bit as sick before. But anything elective, like biopsy for cancer or something, well, we just put you off there. So those numbers aren't in yet, but look, that's a big issue, I think, that people are starting to talk about. Of course, the overriding issue for me is what is the ultimate consequence with government interference with our personal liberty? And anything I remember in my lifetime of a definite program actually helping liberty is very slim. It's usually an intrusion because government always grows. And of course, over the years, I've always related government grows because they get free money and they steal it from the people and they reward the wealthy people. So it's that system that causes this. So right now, I would say, yes, this is good statistics to show what's going on, but it doesn't deal with how many other people die and how much trouble we're going to have because of over time. The people, and they're starting to, I was going to say, people rebel against this. And they are in a way. I think it's close to what you could call a rebellion against these shutdowns. And I think it's great that the president doesn't wear a mask.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah.
But you're right, and this is, of course, the numbers are important and all of that. But, you know, it also brings up an issue that you've raised many times, and it bears repeating, which is this philosophical aspect of what's happening. And, you know, Jeff Deist of the Mises Institute, we both have known for a long time and respect. He had a really great post, some thoughts that he put up on Facebook about the shutdown. And this is something that I'm going to read a little bit and paraphrase a little bit. But he said the shutdown response to coronavirus is much like the Patriot Act or the invasion of Iraq. It can and must be opposed on principle. Well, more and more the facts back us up, and nothing's wrong with citing the facts. The real argument is on the principle, which is that the government does not have the authority or the ability to manage disease controls, to use quarantines, to shut down businesses. So that is really important. And we remember this on the Iraq War. We had a lot of people that opposed the Iraq War, but they didn't necessarily do it on philosophical or principle grounds. Oh, it's going to cost too much. Oh, a lot of Americans are going to get killed. Oh, it's not a good time to do it. Whereas the real argument is you don't have the authority to do this. You cannot do it, and it's absolutely immoral and improper for you to do it. And I think he makes a great point. That is the way we should look at the shutdowns. Forget about the numbers. He said even if 1 million died, it wouldn't change that principle that government has no right to do this to us.
And I think this can be simplified, which is done routinely within the libertarian circles, and that is the concept of self-ownership. That we are born with certain rights, and we own our bodies, we own our lives, and of course the only rule you have to follow is you're not allowed to use force and violence against somebody else. And it's this self-ownership that makes all the difference in the world. As soon as you sign up for the draft, like I had to, and that you give away some of that liberty, and it violates this whole principle of self-ownership. And I think that's what's going on now. You can stay in your house or we're going to come in and arrest you, and arresting people under the most absurd conditions by themselves out in the park playing with their kids. I mean, the thing has just gone crazy, and it violates the whole principle of self-ownership. And it doesn't cancel out anybody's ability and willingness and chance to protect themselves. They can wear masks, they can stay in their house, they can avoid crowds, they can do all these things. But right now, the consensus is of the people, and many times they're pretty good. They're out, playing soccer. Sometimes you'll hear a story where there's a mob of kids out there having fun. We can't have. Yeah. So they chase them away, and 10 minutes later they're all back playing again. So they're not worried about that. Even with all the fear mongering, they're not worried about it. And I think it's breaking through this whole idea that coronavirus, as serious as it is, has certain conditions that need to be also aligned with it, such as age and medications and other illnesses. But to really, and I've said this before because it really annoys me, is when the government officials pressure the medical profession, the hospitals and the clinics and the doctors to rig the numbers and to change a death certificate or emphasize, let's say that we're close to being right. This is a cold virus, could be bad, and there could be complications. But what if it really isn't that bad, and yet they take it and they'll call and they'll even warn family and they say, you know what? I know your husband or so-and-so has cancer and all this thing, but we don't want you to be too surprised, but when the death certificate comes out, it's going to say coronavirus. Yeah. And then when the doctor went along and the medical establishment went along with changing all those death certificates in New York. Yeah. I mean, that is astounding. But more and more of that is going to get out. So as fragile as the internet is, and as much as the government uses the internet against us, the internet is alive and well, and the information is still getting out. So these two doctors are probably more famous now. When they came out and said the whole lockdown doesn't work, 5 million people watch it within a day or two, and they say, we can't have them doing that. So I imagine somewhere that exists, that video. I don't think, but they've given it more attention than ever. Yeah. So it sort of backfired on them.
And the thing is, apparently there's a critique of these two doctors that they got a couple of things wrong, in their methodology, what have you. So then the justification is using that to take the whole thing down, negating everything they said. Rod Dreher, who has a column at the American Conservative, he put up a good piece today. A doctor, I think in New Jersey or something, wrote to him and said, I noticed a few things wrong with that article, with that presentation. However, I want to debate this. I want to have it out there. I want to be able to listen to what they have to say. This is the whole process in a free society of getting to the truth. Leave it up there. Let's talk about what they got wrong and what they may have gotten right. But instead, the reaction is to wipe the whole thing out.
Yeah, it's good that we don't have to worry about that on the mainstream media because they never get anything wrong.
Right. That's right.
Just think if they were closed down, if they had a couple things wrong.
Oh, yeah.
They can have everything wrong. And I think what we heard on the TV on Russiagate, most everything was wrong.
Yeah.
But no, they just march along and go to the next so-called fight.
So-called fight. But we do want to talk a little about foreign policy.
Yeah, that's right.
But which is, and we saw, you said, basically antiwar.com is one-stop shopping today, and they have a good site up today. They have a lot of articles relative to our foreign policy and the effect that this virus might have on it. One of the ones that caught my eye was a former UN aid chief, Jan Egeland, who sent out letters and who's making a big push to lift sanctions on Syria, Iran, Venezuela, and elsewhere during this virus. And unfortunately, he's not opposed to sanctions on principle. So he's not one of us. But he's saying, good grief, this virus is spreading. People are sick. Impoverished countries, sanctioned countries don't have the kind of health infrastructure that advanced countries have. They're going to suffer disproportionately. The average population is going to suffer. So lift this. And there's even a real push for a kind of a global ceasefire, at least temporarily. And that, I think, is encouraging. So that will put that one on the plus column. We'll talk about a few others that may go on the negative column.
Yeah, but we've known that over the many decades that there's been motivation for war when the economic conditions are bad. You see, oh, he's in trouble. He needs a war. Yeah. I think that statements were made at the beginning of this century with the individuals that wanted to go to war in the Middle East. Yeah, it's a distraction from the other problems. And then you say, well, how can they afford it if there's unemployment and there's really a lot of problems, which is a consequence of malinvestment and inflation. Obviously, it isn't enough to bring it down, but it adds fuel to the fire because they keep spending the money. Right now, with these problems going on, if it were truly a spending problem, if debt had a negative effect on us, and now we're up to trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, and it's rising exponentially, that maybe somebody would say, maybe we ought to cut something.
Yeah.
But they're not going to cut anything. I mean, right now, some of our friends that we take care of pretty well, they want their military aid doubled.
Yeah.
So at the same time, more people are being laid off and they get a check for $1,000 and think, they're going to take care of me for this week. Yeah. But the problems are still there. The other thing is the restraint might be you mentioned it, the fear of the virus. You hear about aircraft carriers having 32 people that are positive, but you know what? I may be wrong on this, but they do have positive. But what if this is just an exaggerated version of a bad cold? Whether 30 or 40 people had it, who would care? But I haven't heard them rushing out there with a helicopter for an emergency and taking care of these people. But it has put some restraints on them because they're vulnerable to criticism. So they're facing up to their own propaganda. It's deadly. It's deadly. It's deadly. So if it's deadly for everybody, but it's going to be deadly for the military. And the president advised right now, for various reasons, even though he said this before, we need to bring our troops home from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, our government is bearing down in making sure the sanctions are going to continue. The coronavirus hasn't softened the stand on sanctions because there's such a strong embedded belief that sanctions are sort of the neutral position that you can do this and not really aggravate people into war. But that is not the case. Sanctions, as far as I'm concerned, is an act of war.
Yeah. And the reason why we title it this way is because we think because of this, foreign policy is now up for debate, and we frankly don't know. We think one of these two will happen. We think it might either embolden them, like Rust, Pompeo never sleeps. So he's probably whispering in Trump's ear right now, what you need is a good war. Distract everybody. Come on. Venezuela will be easy. We could take it in half a day. But whether it will embolden people like Pompeo or whether they're going to realize that the political risk, especially as people waking up from their slumber, waking up from obeying orders and putting on their masks and staying 6 feet away from their spouses in the store and all, especially when they start waking up from their slumber and realizing what kind of shape the economy is in. I think they said the first quarter GDP growth was negative 4.2%. That came out today. When they start seeing that and they start thinking, questioning why are we spending these trillions of dollars overseas and making enemies? And that's what we kind of hope will happen. We're trying
Well,
to.
you know, the sanctions have been on for years and years against Iran, and they're always adding them. How many more can they add? But it looks like maybe the chaos has allowed the Iranians to, at least under the circumstances, there's so much oil, it's like water, they were able to get some oil to Syria. Yeah. And it had to avoid the stringent sanctions put on by us, and they got the oil to Syria. So that's a move. Maybe the chaos is helping that. But there are quite a few places where if they decided to back off a little bit, they could back off with the China bashing. And I think there's just no reason. Let's say China is guilty of a large amount of the problems that the neocons claim.
Yeah.
I don't happen to believe everything I read about how bad they are, but they're a problem. But I keep thinking, China lied maybe. Isn't this interesting? They say China lied because they had more disease and more deaths than they really had, and we lie because we have to build up our numbers.
Yeah.
It is so crazy, and but for us to need military operations, why are we so insecure that we have to have our Navy in the South China Sea and just looking for something, and the ships get closer and closer together? It's so useless, but it sort of serves the neocon interest, because an accident can happen, or somebody might make one happen. There's always somebody on one side, on both sides. There's always two factions, the ones that like to maybe work toward peace, and then there's also the warmongering factions, and that's true in this country too, because the people don't want the war, but the leaders who can scare them for the various reasons they want war, and they can drive the scenario and get people hyped up about that. But there's quite a few places, we're not going to back away from Venezuela, but we're not going to invade it. But eventually, the sanctions might be such a total failure, especially if we continue to do what we're doing. I think my sort of a bit of a prediction, or what I think the scenario will be, is that we will back off. Not because we have gained wisdom, but because the market gained wisdom in saying, you guys have printed way too many dollars. You've taken advantage of us. You just print money and buy whatever you want from us, and then you say you're the king of the world, and you put on sanctions on everybody, and you take your military and you post them in 170 countries. I think that's going to come to an end. But I'd like to see a smoother transition and have it back to that principle thing. What is the principle? And the money is a principle, and the coronavirus is a principle, but the real principle is who owns our lives. And the government, if it's going to exist, would be there to protect that principle. It would be simplified, and government could be much smaller.
Yeah, that's true. And there are some hot spots that, kind of worry us a little bit. Trump has warned that he's going to shoot down Iranian boats, which is a little scary. The USS Barry, it keeps hanging out in the South China Sea. It's irritating the Chinese. There are a lot of people in the U.S., both Democrats and Republicans, are all full on board to China bashing. You mentioned it earlier. They're looking for a scapegoat. They want China to be the scapegoat. Yesterday, the Chinese government sent warships into the South China Sea to, quote, track, monitor, verify, identify, and expel the USS Barry, which they claim has been going into Chinese territorial waters. You mentioned earlier that Israel wants to double down on aid. Hey, give us some money. He wants some money. They want double the aid when we're suffering. So there are some hot spots. But Dr. Paul, I want to end on a happy note, because that's the kind of person I am. Yeah. And I want to highlight a local hero who I noticed yesterday. If we can go to our picture, this is this lady. She is the owner. If we can go to our picture, please. This lady is the owner of a. If we can have that clip, please.
Maybe we lost that?
Oh, maybe we lost the clip.
Well, go ahead and describe it and see. He might come up with it.
Well, she's the owner of an ice house in Oyster Creek, the Bad S Ice House in Oyster Creek. Here she is. She put up a Facebook post. She's fed up with it. She said, I'm not trying to be a rebel. I'm trying to save my livelihood that I've worked so hard for, just like the others. My girls have been with me from day one. They've been without a job for 40 days. My musicians haven't been able to work. My loyal customers. If you disagree and believe everything that this fake blank media says, then please stay home. You can have your groceries and medicine delivered. But this Texas mama is going to open starting Friday, May 1st. We'll have live music. We'll be having live music all day Saturday. We'll be having social distancing, but we're going to open up. So this is the spirit.
Where'd you say this is going to be?
It's in Oyster Creek.
Well, you know, that's not very far from here.
We could do an episode of the show from down
we'll do a live broadcast. Maybe. I want to look. I want to check it in. I'll check it out a little bit more. But it does sound very interesting. And I think that's a sentiment that exists up there. But people, they want to be patriotic. They want to be law-abiding. And you elect governments, and you're supposed to accept the governments even when they mess up. But what if they mess up all the time and they shouldn't exist? That's what happens here. What if they assume you don't have a right to your life, you don't own your own life, and we can do with it what we want, and we believe in national service and military drafts and all these things, and we can destroy people's lives through the destruction of the monetary system and destruction of runaway legislation? No, that's good news. It's the effort to live free is still there. I think it's natural. I think they cannot kill it even in the worst of times. I think even under the worst of conditions in the Soviet Union, there were people, even in Nazi Germany, there were always people. They had to hide to protect their lives, but there were always people who knew what was right and worked for the day where they could be free again. But what we're trying to do here is trying to prevent that from happening. And I would say that we've had a little bit of help because the things that people talk about now are things that we tried to get people to talk about before they passed the first Patriot Act, before going into the Middle East. So I think, and right now, of course, we would never have put on this lockdown thing, both for scientific reasons as well as for the issue of liberty. But people are waking up. It's a shame they have to wake up late, but when you're fighting the mainstream media and 100% almost, the propaganda that we get from the media, people go along and they have to be scared. In foreign policy, they have to be scared. In this domestic policy, once again, they had to be scared. And for the event to get people stirred up about the 9/11 thing, they had to have it in 9/11. People have to be scared, and that's been known historically. So, and it's hard to erase it because the governments can be ruthless. But I tell you what, there's a spunk in some people. And it's around there, and you know what? The neat part about it's contagious. It's more contagious than that virus, a virus of lies. And it's contagious, and that's what we would like to see. More contagions on the principles of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.